At 52 years old, Lydia believed her limited vision was her greatest burden, until the sound of her own sister's car disappearing into a white blizzard revealed the truth. The real darkness was in the heart of the one she loved most. Abandoned on a forgotten road with only her dog Barnaby and a basket of lavender sweets, Lydia had everything to become just another tragic winter statistic. But what happened inside that rusted school bus, lost among frozen pines, wasn't a tragedy. While the world outside plunged to -35 degrees, Lydia transformed scrap metal into a sanctuary of light and fragrance that defied death itself. How did a bus in ruins become the most beautiful place on earth? The answer will change the way you see your own challenges. If you believe it's never too late to start over, and that beauty can bloom even in a desert of ice, consider subscribing to this channel. Here we tell the stories of resilient souls who transformed wounds into light. Hit that like button so this story can reach someone who needs to remember that true wealth isn't what we see with our eyes, but what we create with our hands and hearts. Because what Lydia built in 5 days of darkness became a beacon that would light the path for thousands. Lydia Morrison had been making lavender honey sweets for 30 years, but in the last 3, since her husband Daniel died peacefully in his sleep, the kitchen had become more than just a workplace. It had become her entire world. She stood at the counter in her sister Sharon's house in rural Montana, her hands moving with practiced precision, even though her eyes could barely see what they were doing. Macular degeneration had stolen the center of her vision 5 years ago, leaving her with only peripheral sight, enough to navigate, but not enough to see faces or read without magnification. "Careful with that pot, Lydia. You're going to burn yourself again." Sharon's voice cut through the kitchen, sharp and cold despite the warmth from the stove. Lydia didn't respond. She was used to Sharon's tone, the barely concealed impatience, the sighs that said more than words ever could. For 3 years, since losing the small house she and Daniel had shared, Lydia had lived here in Sharon's spare room, trying to stay small, trying to be useful, trying not to be a burden. But Sharon, at 57, had made it abundantly clear that Lydia was a burden. A 52-year-old widow with failing eyesight and a dog, taking up space that could be rented out, eating food that cost money, existing in a way that complicated Sharon's carefully organized life. Lydia's hands moved over the pot of honey, feeling the heat rising. She added dried lavender, the real French lavender she ordered online with her small business income, and stirred slowly. The scent filled the kitchen, sweet and herbal, a smell that always reminded her of Daniel, who had planted the first lavender in their garden 20 years ago. "Barnaby, down," Lydia said softly, and the golden retriever mix lying by her feet shifted slightly. He was 8 years old, with a coat the color of honey, and he'd been with Lydia since Daniel died. Not officially a service dog, but he'd learned to guide her when her vision failed, to press against her leg when she was about to walk into something, to be her eyes when the world became too blurry. Sharon walked into the kitchen, her footsteps heavy with purpose. "Lydia, we need to talk." Lydia's hands paused over the pot. Those 4 words, "we need to talk," had never preceded anything good. The real estate agent called. "I have a buyer interested in the house. Good offer, really good, but they want to move in next month." Lydia felt her chest tighten. "Next month? I've been thinking about this for a while," Sharon continued, her voice taking on that practiced, reasonable tone that Lydia had learned to fear. "You can't live with me forever. It's not fair to either of us. You need proper care, Lydia. Somewhere with people trained to help someone with your condition." "My condition is macular degeneration, Sharon. I'm not disabled. I can still work, still function. You make $200 a month selling candy, Lydia. That's not sustainable. And that dog, no offense, but he sheds everywhere, and the new buyers have allergies." "Barnaby is all I have left," Lydia said quietly. Sharon sighed, the sound filled with exasperation. "Don't be dramatic. I found a place. Whispering Pines Assisted Living. It's 2 hours north, near the Canadian border. They have openings. I already filled out the application." Lydia's hands gripped the counter. "You applied without asking me? Because I knew you'd fight it. But Lydia, be realistic. You're 52 with no income, no house, deteriorating eyesight, and a dog that most facilities won't accept. Whispering Pines is one of the few that might make an exception, but we need to tour it this week. They have an opening now. If we wait, you'll have nowhere to go when I sell the house. What about Barnaby? We'll figure something out. Maybe they'll let you visit him on weekends if I keep him temporarily. No. Lydia's voice was firm, despite the trembling in her hands. I won't leave him. Sharon's patience snapped. Then what's your plan, Lydia? You going to live in your car? Oh wait, you don't have a car, you don't have anything. You've been living off my charity for 3 years. 3 years of me feeding you, housing you, putting up with that dog and your little hobby business that barely covers your phone bill. Each word landed like a slap. Lydia had known Sharon resented her presence, but hearing it spoken so bluntly made it real in a way silence never could. I'm sorry I've been such a burden, Lydia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sharon's tone softened slightly, perhaps recognizing she'd gone too far. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be practical. Whispering Pines is a good facility. You'll have your own room, meals provided, activities. It's better than struggling here. And Barnaby? Sharon didn't answer immediately. We'll discuss it. But Lydia, you have to be realistic about what you can and can't do. You can't see properly, you can't drive, you can barely navigate your own room without that dog. At some point, you have to accept help. After Sharon left the kitchen, Lydia stood at the counter, her hands shaking as she tried to return to her work. But the joy had drained from it. The lavender honey that had always smelled like home now smelled like the end of something. Barnaby pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. She reached down and buried her fingers in his soft fur, feeling the steady warmth of his body, the absolute loyalty that asked nothing in return. Just you and me, boy, she whispered. Just you and me. Outside, snow had begun to fall. It was early November, and Montana winters came fast and brutal. The weather report on Sharon's radio warned of a major system moving in from Canada. Arctic air, high winds, potential whiteout conditions. But Lydia barely heard it. She was too focused on the growing dread in her chest, the knowledge that in a week, maybe 2, she'd be taken to a facility where Barnaby couldn't follow, where her small business would end, where she'd spend her remaining years as a charity case in a place that smelled of disinfectant instead of lavender. That night, as she lay in the small spare room with Barnaby on the floor beside her bed, Lydia stared at the ceiling she could barely see and wondered when her life had become so small. When had she transformed from a woman with a husband, a home, a garden full of lavender, into someone who existed only at the mercy of others? Daniel's face appeared in her memory, not clearly, because she couldn't see faces clearly anymore, but in the way she remembered him. Kind eyes, gentle hands, a voice that always made her feel safe. He'd been 10 years older, a carpenter who'd built their house with his own hands. When he died at 65 of a heart attack, sudden and painless in the night, Lydia had lost more than a husband. She'd lost her anchor, and now she was losing everything else. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The storm was coming. Lydia just didn't know that the storm outside would be nothing compared to the one waiting for her on a forgotten road in the Montana wilderness. The morning of the drive to Whispering Pines, Sharon was brisk and efficient, loading Lydia's small suitcase into the trunk of her Subaru with quick, purposeful movements. They said we should arrive before noon for the tour, Sharon said, checking her phone. Weather's supposed to turn bad this afternoon. We need to get moving. Lydia sat in the passenger seat, Barnaby at her feet in the footwell, the only place Sharon would allow him. In her lap she held a wicker basket containing 24 of her lavender honey sweets, carefully wrapped in silk cloth. She'd made them last night, unable to sleep, needing to do something with her hands. Why did you bring those? Sharon asked, eyeing the basket. I thought maybe the staff would like them, as a thank you for considering Barnaby. Sharon's expression suggested she thought this was pointless, but she said nothing, just started the car and pulled out onto the county road. The drive north on Highway 200 was quiet. The landscape was already winter stark. Bare trees, brown grass, and patches of dirty snow left from an earlier storm. The sky was heavy and grey, promising more snow soon. Lydia couldn't see much of it. To her damaged eyes, the world outside the window was a blur of browns and greys and whites, shapes without definition. She relied on Sharon's occasional narration. "There's the old Miller farm. That's where the hardware store used to be," to orient herself. Barnaby sensed her anxiety, pressing his warm head against her leg. She stroked his ears, finding comfort in his solid presence. "The facility really is nice," Sharon said after an hour of silence. "I looked at the website. They have gardens, activity rooms, a library. You'll make friends." Lydia didn't respond. She was 52, not 82. She didn't need arts and crafts and bingo. She needed her life back. She needed Daniel back. She needed her eyesight back. But those things were impossible, so instead, she was being driven to a building where she'd live out her days as someone's patient, someone's responsibility, someone to be managed. They'd been driving for 90 minutes when Sharon suddenly slowed the car. "What's wrong?" Lydia asked. "Road sign says there's construction ahead. Detour." Sharon's voice was irritated. "This is going to add 30 minutes at least." The detour took them off the main highway onto smaller county roads, then onto roads that barely qualified as roads at all, gravel and dirt, winding through dense pine forest. The snow began to fall more heavily, fat white flakes that quickly accumulated on the windshield. "This is ridiculous," Sharon muttered, turning on the wipers. "GPS says this is the fastest route, but I can barely see where I'm going." Lydia felt the car slow further, felt Sharon's tension in the way she gripped the wheel. The wind had picked up, making the car shudder slightly. And then Sharon said something that made Lydia's blood run cold. "I can't do this anymore." "What?" Sharon pulled the car to the side of the road, or what Lydia assumed was the side of the road. The car stopped. The engine idled. The snow fell. "I said I can't do this anymore, Lydia. I've been thinking about it the whole drive. I call the facility. I tell them you had a medical emergency we had to cancel. I'm done. I'm done with the responsibility, the guilt, the constant weight of having to take care of you." Lydia's hands tightened on the basket in her lap. "Sharon, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I tried. For 3 years I tried. But I have my own life. I have my own problems. I can't keep sacrificing everything for you." Through the passenger window, Lydia could make out a structure, blurry and indistinct but large, some kind of building. "Where are we?" "Old gas station. Been abandoned for years. We passed it on the way to the detour." Sharon's voice was flat, emotionless. "There's an old store building. It has a roof. You and the dog can wait there until someone comes by." Lydia felt like she'd been punched. "You're leaving me here. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay here and figure out your own life, or you can accept that you need professional care and stop fighting me every step. But I'm not driving another hour to a facility where you're going to make a scene and refuse to stay." "Sharon, it's snowing. It's freezing. This road is empty." "Then maybe you'll finally accept help when someone does find you. Maybe you'll finally admit you can't do this alone." Sharon reached across and opened the passenger door. Cold air and snow rushed in. "Get out, Lydia. You can't be serious. Get out!" Lydia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the basket. Barnaby had stood up, sensing danger, his body tense. "Please don't do this," Lydia whispered. "Please." "I've already done it." Sharon's voice was hard. 3 years of doing it. "I'm exhausted, Lydia. I'm exhausted from caring. Now get out, or I'll drive you back home, and you can figure out where to go when I sell the house next week." Lydia fumbled for the door handle. Her vision blurred not just from macular degeneration but from tears. Barnaby jumped out first, immediately shaking snow from his coat. Lydia followed, her feet landing in several inches of snow, the cold immediately soaking through her shoes. She'd barely cleared the door when Sharon pulled it shut. The locks clicked. Lydia turned toward the driver's window, but could barely make out Sharon's shape through the falling snow and her failing vision. "My suitcase," Lydia said, her voice breaking. "At least give me my clothes." The trunk popped open. Sharon didn't get out, just used the release inside the car. Lydia stumbled to the back. Barnaby pressed against her legs, guiding her. She grabbed the small suitcase, feeling the cold of the metal handle through her thin gloves. The trunk slammed shut. The car's engine revved. And then, through the white chaos of the storm, Lydia heard the sound that would haunt her for days. Her sister's car driving away, the engine fading, disappearing into the wind and snow until there was nothing left but silence and cold. Lydia stood in the middle of an empty road in rural Montana, 52 years old and nearly blind, with a dog, a suitcase, a basket of lavender sweets, and the growing certainty that her sister had just left her to die. The abandoned gas station was barely a station anymore, just a collapsed canopy over where pumps used to be, and a small concrete building with boards over the windows. The door was locked, and when Lydia tried it with her gloved hands, it wouldn't budge. The wind was vicious, cutting through her jacket like it wasn't there. Lydia's face was already numb, and she'd only been outside for 5 minutes. The temperature was dropping fast. The morning had been cold, maybe 15 degrees, but with the storm system moving in, it would plunge much lower. Barnaby whined, pressing close to her legs. She could feel him shivering. "Okay, boy," she said, her teeth chattering. "We need shelter. There has to be something." She couldn't see more than blurry shapes through the snow. The world was white and grey and terrifying in its emptiness. But Barnaby's training kicked in. He'd spent 3 years learning to guide her, and when she said find shelter, he understood. He pulled, his leash taut, leading her away from the locked building. Lydia could barely feel her feet anymore. The suitcase was heavy in one hand, the basket in the other. She wanted to drop them both, but the basket had food, and the suitcase had clothes, things she'd need if she survived the night. If. They walked, or rather stumbled, for what felt like forever but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. The landscape was a blur of white and dark. Trees, she thought. They were in trees now, the wind slightly less vicious with the pines providing some buffer. And then Barnaby stopped and barked. It was his alert bark, the sound he made when he'd found something important. Lydia squinted, trying to make sense of the large yellow blur ahead. She dropped the suitcase and moved forward, hands outstretched. Her gloves touched metal, cold but solid. She traced the shape, flat, vertical, windows, a door. "Good boy," she whispered. "Good boy, Barnaby." It was a bus. A school bus, she realized, as her hands found the distinctive shape of the hood, the front grille, old, abandoned, but intact. The door was closed, but when she found the handle and pulled, it creaked open, snow cascading down from where it had accumulated on the rubber seal. The interior was dark and smelled of rust, mold, and decades of abandonment. But it was out of the wind, out of the snow. It was shelter. Lydia climbed the steps, Barnaby scrambling up behind her. The driver's seat was torn, springs visible, but there were rows of seats behind it, also torn, but present. The floor was dirty, covered in leaves and debris, but it was a floor. The windows were intact, grimy but unbroken. She pulled her suitcase up into the bus and closed the door. Immediately the howling wind became muffled. The temperature inside wasn't warm. It was freezing, maybe only a few degrees above the outside air, but without the wind, it felt survivable. Lydia sank onto one of the front bench seats, Barnaby jumping up beside her. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur, and allowed herself to cry. Not because she was scared, though she was terrified. Not because she was cold, though she was freezing, but because her sister had abandoned her like garbage, had driven away knowing Lydia might die, had chosen convenience over family. The betrayal was more devastating than the cold. After several minutes, Lydia forced herself to stop crying. Tears wouldn't help. She needed to think. She pulled her phone from her pocket, an old flip phone, the only kind she could still operate with her limited vision. The screen was large and bright, but when she opened it, her heart sank. No signal. They were too deep in the wilderness, too far from any tower. She tried anyway, dialing 911. Nothing. The call wouldn't connect. Lydia closed the phone and looked around the bus, trying to assess what she had. Her vision was so limited that details were impossible, but she could make out shapes, could use touch to understand her environment. The bus was maybe 35 feet long, with rows of bench seats, most with torn vinyl and exposed foam. The floor was metal with a rubber coating, now cracked and peeling. The windows were large and intact, but so dirty that even with better vision, she doubted she could see through them clearly. At the back of the bus was a larger blur, an emergency exit door, she guessed. She didn't try to open it. If it was frozen shut, she'd just exhaust herself. She had her suitcase. Inside 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. Not much. She had the basket of sweets, 2 dozen pieces of lavender honey candy, wrapped in silk cloth. She also had the small jars of honey and dried lavender she'd packed, thinking she might make more sweets at the facility. She had Barnaby, 60 pounds of warm, loyal dog, and she had herself, a 52-year-old woman who'd spent 30 years making candy, who'd survived losing her husband and her home and her independence, who'd been told over and over that she was helpless. But she wasn't helpless. She was scared. She was cold. She was abandoned. But she wasn't helpless. Lydia stood, her legs shaking from cold and fear, and began to explore the bus more carefully. If she was going to survive, she needed to make this metal shell into something livable. She needed to turn it into a home. The first night was brutal. Lydia had no way to heat the bus. The temperature outside dropped to -20 degrees, and inside it was maybe 10 degrees warmer, cold enough that her breath frosted in the air, cold enough that Barnaby's water bowl froze solid within an hour. She'd layered every piece of clothing from her suitcase, then wrapped herself and Barnaby in the silk cloth from her candy basket. The silk was thin, but it was something. They huddled together on one of the front bench seats, her arms wrapped around the dog, his body heat the only warmth keeping her from hypothermia. She dozed but didn't sleep, too cold and too scared to truly rest. Every hour, she forced herself to move, to flex her fingers and toes, to keep blood flowing. She'd heard enough stories about people freezing to death in Montana winters to know that falling asleep in this cold could be fatal. By dawn, though she couldn't see the sun rise through the dirty windows and the blowing snow, Lydia was exhausted, frozen, and desperate. But she was alive, and now she needed to figure out how to stay that way. She had food. The 2 dozen candies would last maybe 3 days if she rationed carefully. She had water. The snow outside was clean enough to melt and drink if she could figure out how. She had shelter. The bus protected her from wind and snow, but she had no heat. Lydia thought about Daniel, about the years they'd spent in their little house. He'd been a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands, who could look at a problem and see solutions. What would he do? She remembered winter camping trips when they were younger, before her vision failed. Daniel building fires. Daniel explaining how pioneers had survived brutal winters with nothing but basic tools and ingenuity. Think, Lydia, she whispered to herself. You're not stupid. You're not helpless. Think. She began a systematic search of the bus, using touch more than sight. Her hands explored every surface, every crevice. In the driver's seat area, she found loose change, 73 cents in nickels and pennies. Useless for survival, but she pocketed it anyway. Under the seats she found debris, old papers, bottle caps, a few rusty bolts. But she also found something useful, a metal coffee can, dented but intact. This could hold melted snow for water. At the back of the bus, near the emergency exit, she found a small storage compartment she'd missed in the dark the night before. Inside, a first aid kit, long expired but containing gauze, tape and scissors, a roll of duct tape, partially used, a box of matches, damp but possibly salvageable if dried, and most importantly, a roll of aluminum foil. Lydia's mind began working. Matches meant fire. Foil meant she could create a makeshift stove or heater. The coffee can could hold melted snow, but she needed fuel for fire. She thought about her suitcase, about the things she'd packed. Clothes were combustible, but she needed those for warmth. The flashlight ran on batteries, useless for fire. Then she remembered the wicker basket. And inside the basket, wrapped carefully to keep them from breaking, were 3 large pillar candles made of beeswax, leftovers from a batch she'd made months ago. Beeswax candles burned hot and long. 3 large pillars could provide hours of heat. It wasn't enough to warm the entire bus, but if she could create a small heated area, she and Barnaby could survive. Lydia spent the rest of that day working. Her fingers were stiff from cold. Her vision made everything twice as difficult, but she persisted. She used the scissors from the first aid kit to cut open the silk cloth, creating smaller pieces she could use as insulation. She hung pieces over the windows in the front of the bus, blocking drafts. The silk, thin as it was, created an additional barrier against the cold. She used the aluminum foil to create a reflector behind the candles, directing their heat forward instead of letting it dissipate. She positioned the candles in the metal coffee can, which she'd placed on the floor in front of the first bench seat, creating a small contained heat source. She arranged the remaining bench seats to create a small enclosed area, essentially a fort within the bus, with seats forming walls on 3 sides and the front of the bus as the 4th wall. This created a space maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, small enough that the candle's heat could actually warm it. She spread her clothes on the seats to create padding and insulation. She arranged the remaining silk cloth as makeshift blankets. It took hours. She worked by touch more than sight, her hands numb, her body exhausted. Barnaby stayed close, sensing that his human was doing something important, occasionally licking her hand in encouragement. As the second night fell, Lydia carefully dried the matches from the storage compartment, using her body heat and patience. When one finally struck and held flame, she lit the 3 beeswax candles. The effect was immediate. Warm, golden light filled her small enclosed space. The candle's heat, reflected by the aluminum foil, began to raise the temperature noticeably. Within an hour, her little fort was almost 40 degrees, still cold, but survivable. The smell was beautiful. Beeswax has a natural honey scent, sweet and clean. Combined with the lingering lavender from her candies, the air in her small sanctuary smelled like summer, like Daniel's garden, like home. Lydia wrapped herself and Barnaby in the silk cloth and finally, truly slept. When she woke hours later, the candles had burned down but were still lit. The temperature in her fort was hovering around 45 degrees. She was still cold, but she wasn't freezing. She melted snow in the coffee can, drinking the cold water and giving some to Barnaby. She ate half of one lavender candy, rationing carefully, and then she began to truly transform the space. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged outside with unrelenting fury, Lydia worked. She cleaned. Using snow and her bare hands, she scrubbed the floor of her enclosed area until it was as clean as she could make it. She wiped down the windows, removing years of grime. With her limited vision, she couldn't see if she'd succeeded, but her hands told her the surfaces were smoother, cleaner. She organized. Everything had a place. Her clothes folded neatly, her food arranged carefully, her small collection of supplies stored in specific locations she could find by touch. She decorated. This was the part that surprised even herself. Using the silk cloth, she created curtains for her little fort, hanging them from the ceiling with duct tape. The silk caught the candlelight, glowing amber and rose. She hung bundles of dried lavender from the ceiling, their scent filling the space. She arranged the honey jars like art pieces, their golden contents catching the light. She created order from chaos, beauty from ruin. By the 5th day, when the storm finally began to ease, Lydia sat in her sanctuary, because that's what it had become, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Pride. She'd done this. With her damaged eyes and her aging body and her limited resources, she'd created a space that was warm and clean and beautiful. A space that smelled like honey and lavender. A space where light danced on silk curtains and reflected in golden jars. A space that proved she wasn't helpless. She wasn't a burden, she was a survivor. And she was, in her own way, an artist. On the 4th night, when the temperature outside dropped to -35 degrees, and the wind howled with such force that the bus shuddered, Lydia thought she might die. The candles were burning low. She'd lit the last of her 3 pillars, knowing that when it went out she'd have no more heat. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Her food was almost gone. 5 candies left, rationed to 1 per day. She couldn't feel her toes despite wearing 3 pairs of socks. Her fingers were stiff and painful. Barnaby was shivering even pressed against her body. This was it. This was how it ended. Not from the abandonment itself, but from its aftermath. She'd survived 5 days, had created something beautiful, but survival had limits when the world was this cold and this cruel. Lydia lay in her little fort, wrapped in silk and grief, and for the first time allowed herself to truly feel the rage. Not at the storm, not at her circumstances, but at Sharon, her sister, her only living family. The person who should have protected her had instead discarded her like trash. "I hate you," Lydia whispered into the darkness. "I hate you for this." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite true. Hate required energy she didn't have. Hate required caring, and she was so tired of caring about Sharon's opinion, Sharon's judgment, Sharon's impossible standards. What she really felt was grief. Grief for the sister she'd once had, or thought she'd had. Grief for the relationship that had never been what Lydia needed it to be. She thought back over their lives. Sharon, 5 years older, had always been the responsible one, the practical one. Their parents had died young, car accident when Lydia was 20 and Sharon was 25, and Sharon had stepped into the role of guardian, managing their small inheritance, making sure Lydia finished college. But even then, there had been a coldness, a sense that Sharon was doing her duty, but resenting every moment of it. Lydia had married Daniel at 23, had moved to their small house, had built a life of lavender gardens and honey sweets and quiet happiness. Sharon had visited maybe twice a year, always with that look of judgment, at Lydia's old-fashioned lifestyle, her small business, her contentment with simple things. When Daniel died and Lydia lost the house to medical debt, Sharon had taken her in. But it was clear from day one that this was charity, not love. Every meal was accompanied by sighs. Every request was met with exasperation. Every day was a reminder that Lydia was a failure who couldn't take care of herself. And Lydia had accepted it, had shrunk herself, had tried so hard to be grateful, to be small, to not be a burden, until Sharon proved that Lydia could never be small enough, could never be grateful enough, until Sharon decided that the burden was too heavy and simply dropped it in the middle of a blizzard on an abandoned road. "Why?" Lydia asked the darkness. "Why wasn't I worth saving?" Barnaby whined softly, licking her face. And in that simple gesture, the unconditional love of a dog who'd stayed with her through everything, Lydia found an answer. She was worth saving, not because Sharon thought so, not because society thought so, but because she, Lydia Morrison, had value that existed independent of anyone else's judgment. She had created this sanctuary with her own hands. She had survived 5 days of brutal cold with nothing but determination and creativity. She had turned an abandoned bus into a place of beauty and warmth. She had done that. Not Sharon, not anyone else. Her. And if Sharon couldn't see her worth, that was Sharon's blindness, not Lydia's. The anger drained away, leaving something else in its place. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Sharon had been drowning in her own fears, her own limitations. She'd looked at Lydia and seen only burden because that's all Sharon could see. Her vision was limited not by macular degeneration, but by a poverty of spirit, a failure to see that caring for someone wasn't a burden but an honor. Lydia had spent 3 years seeing herself through Sharon's eyes, as helpless, as useless, as a burden. But Sharon's eyes were wrong. "I forgive you," Lydia whispered, though Sharon couldn't hear. "Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was okay, but because I refuse to carry this rage. I refuse to let your coldness make me cold. I refuse to believe I'm worthless just because you couldn't see my worth." She thought about Daniel, about the man who'd spent 31 years showing her every single day that she was loved, that she was valuable, that she was enough exactly as she was. "I'm going to survive this," she said to his memory. "I'm going to live, and I'm going to build something beautiful with whatever time I have left. Not because I'm trying to prove anything to Sharon, but because that's who I am, someone who creates beauty, someone who turns honey into art, someone who matters." The candle flickered, nearly out. Lydia pulled Barnaby closer and closed her eyes. If this was the end, at least she'd die knowing her own worth. At least she'd die in a place she'd made beautiful. At least she'd die free of Sharon's judgment. But she didn't die, because just as the candle went out, just as the darkness closed in completely, Lydia heard something, a sound outside the bus, footsteps crunching in snow, a voice, faint but human, calling out, "Hello? Is someone in there? I saw light." Help had arrived. Elias Hartman had been a nature photographer for National Geographic for 23 years, and he'd learned to respect winter storms. But he'd also learned that the most spectacular images came from the edges of danger, the moments when nature revealed itself in its most raw, powerful form. He'd been tracking this particular storm system for 2 days, photographing the way it transformed the Montana landscape. He'd gotten shots of ice formations, of snow-bent pines, of the way light filtered through falling snow at dawn, and then his truck had gotten stuck. He'd tried to power through a drift, had misjudged the depth, and now his vehicle was axle-deep in snow a mile from the nearest plowed road. His satellite phone had battery, but the storm was interfering with signal. He'd called for help, but wasn't sure the message got through, so he'd started walking, following what looked like a service road, hoping it would lead to shelter. He was 54, in decent shape, but the cold was brutal. Even with professional winter gear, he was feeling the bite of -35-degree weather. His face was numb despite his balaclava. His fingers ached despite his insulated gloves. He'd been walking for 40 minutes when he saw it, a faint amber glow through the trees. At first he thought he was hallucinating. Cold could do that, could make you see things, but as he pushed through the drifts toward the light, it became clearer. Something was glowing. Something warm and golden in the middle of this frozen hell. He emerged into a small clearing and stopped, stunned. An old yellow school bus sat among the pines, half buried in snow, and from its windows a soft amber light glowed, warm and impossible. "Hello?" Elias called out, his voice hoarse. "Is someone in there?" "I saw light." The bus door opened. A woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, wearing layers of mismatched clothes, her face thin and exhausted but alert. Behind her, a golden dog barked once, then wagged its tail. "Are you real?" the woman asked, her voice shaking. "Or am I hallucinating?" "I'm real," Elias said. "I'm lost. My truck's stuck. I saw your light." The woman's face crumpled slightly, relief visible even in the dim light. "Thank God, come in, please, before you freeze." Elias climbed the bus steps, and the warmth, relative warmth anyway, hit him immediately. It was maybe 45 degrees inside, nowhere near comfortable, but compared to the -35 outside, it felt like a sauna. And then he saw what she'd created. The front section of the bus had been transformed into something that looked like a dream. Silk curtains hung from the ceiling, glowing amber in candlelight. Bundles of dried lavender hung like chandeliers. Honey jars caught the light, turning golden and beautiful. The whole space smelled sweet and herbal, like summer transported into winter. "What?" Elias couldn't find words. "How did you—" The woman closed the door behind him, sealing out the wind. "I had 5 days, and very few options. Please, sit. You must be freezing." She guided him to one of the bench seats in her enclosed area. The dog, the golden retriever, pressed against his legs, sharing warmth. The woman wrapped a piece of silk cloth around his shoulders. "My name is Lydia," she said. "Lydia Morrison, this is Barnaby." "Elias Hartman." He was still staring around in amazement. "How long have you been here?" 5 days. My sister left me at an abandoned gas station during the storm. I found the bus. I've been surviving." The casual way she said, "my sister left me," made it sound almost normal, but Elias heard the pain underneath. He'd been a photographer long enough to read people's faces, to see the stories behind their eyes. Even though Lydia's eyes were unusual, she was looking at him but not quite at him, her gaze slightly off-center. "Your sister left you?" Elias asked carefully. "During a blizzard? She thought I was a burden. I have macular degeneration. I can't see very well. She was taking me to an assisted living facility, but Lydia's voice caught. "She decided it was too much trouble." Elias felt rage on her behalf, but he kept his voice calm. "That's unconscionable. It's done." Lydia's voice was quiet but firm. "I can't change what she did. I can only control what I do next. She moved around her small space with surprising confidence despite her vision impairment, pulling out a jar of what looked like honey candy. I don't have much, but would you like some food? It's lavender honey, I made it. Elias took one of the small candies she offered. It was wrapped in silk, tied with a tiny ribbon. He unwrapped it and tasted it. Sweet, floral, complex. This is incredible, he said honestly. You made this. It's what I do. Did. I had a small business. She smiled slightly. Had. I'm not sure what I have now. They sat in the amber light, sharing the warmth of the candles and each other's presence. Elias explained about his photography work, about tracking the storm, about his truck being stuck. Lydia explained about her life before, the house, Daniel, the lavender garden, the slow loss of her vision, Sharon's growing resentment. I spent 3 years thinking I was helpless, Lydia said, believing Sharon when she said I couldn't function alone. But these 5 days, I survived. I created this. She gestured around the sanctuary. With my hands and my damaged eyes and my determination, I'm not helpless, I never was. Elias pulled out his camera, a professional Canon that was his life's tool. May I? He asked. This space, it's extraordinary. The way you've created beauty in the middle of survival. I'd like to document it. With your permission. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. I can't see what you're photographing. You could be taking pictures of a mess, and I wouldn't know. I'm photographing art, Elias said. That's what this is. This is art. He spent the next hour shooting, the silk curtains catching candlelight, the honey jars arranged like sculptures, the lavender hanging like organic architecture, Lydia's hands as she worked with her materials, Barnaby's loyal presence, the way amber light transformed decay into beauty. Through his lens, Elias saw what Lydia had created, a sanctuary not just of physical warmth, but of human resilience. Every detail spoke of someone refusing to surrender, someone transforming limitation into possibility. You're remarkable, he said finally, lowering the camera. You know that, right? Lydia's smile was sad. I'm 52 and nearly blind and abandoned by my only family. I'm not sure remarkable is the word I'd use. Remarkable is exactly the word. Most people would have died in this situation. You created a home. You made beauty. That's remarkable. They talked through the night, sharing warmth and stories and the strange intimacy that comes from surviving danger together. Elias learned about Daniel, about the lavender garden, about 30 years of marriage built on kindness. Lydia learned about Elias's travels, his photographs of landscapes and wildlife, his own loneliness, divorced 15 years ago, children grown and distant, a life spent observing beauty but rarely experiencing connection. As dawn approached, the 6th day since Lydia's abandonment, the storm finally began to break. Wind dropped. Snow lightened. The world outside the bus windows slowly became visible. My satellite phone might work now, Elias said. I can call for help. Get us both out of here. Lydia nodded, but Elias noticed she looked around her sanctuary with something like regret. You'll miss it, he said. It wasn't a question. I built something here, Lydia said softly. Something that was mine. For 5 days I wasn't anyone's burden. I was just me, surviving, creating. It's strange to say, but these have been the first days in 3 years where I felt like myself again. Then we'll make sure you don't lose that, Elias said. Whatever happens next, we'll make sure you keep what you've built here. Not the physical space, but the knowledge that you're capable, that you're strong, that you're an artist. He made the call. Rescue would arrive within 3 hours. As they waited, as morning light filtered through the dirty bus windows and revealed the full extent of what Lydia had created, Elias took more photographs, but he also took something else, Lydia's hand in his, and neither of them let go. The rescue came at noon, a sheriff's deputy in a tracked vehicle followed by an EMT. They'd found Elias's truck, had traced his emergency call, had been searching since dawn when the storm finally broke enough to allow safe travel. Ma'am, we need to get you to a hospital, the EMT said to Lydia. You've been exposed to extreme cold for 5 days. We need to check for frostbite, hypothermia. I'm fine, Lydia said, though she allowed them to examine her. Her fingers and toes were cold but functional. She had mild dehydration, but otherwise she'd survived remarkably unscathed. The deputy looked around the bus with undisguised amazement. "You've been living in here, surviving in here," Lydia corrected. "And yes, 4 or 5 days. How did you—" The deputy gestured at the silk curtains, the arranged honey jars, the lavender bundles. "This looks like someone's bedroom, not an abandoned bus." "That was the point," Lydia said simply. At the hospital in Kalispell, the nearest city with medical facilities, Lydia was admitted for observation. She spent 6 hours being examined, rehydrated, warmed slowly to prevent shock. Barnaby was taken to a local vet who declared him healthy and gave him a bath and a meal. Elias refused to leave. He sat in the waiting room, then in Lydia's hospital room when she was finally released from examination, his camera bag at his feet, his presence solid and reassuring. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked when they were finally alone. Lydia had been thinking about this. "Not really, my sister's house, and I can't go back there." "I won't." "Good. You shouldn't." Elias hesitated, then said, "I have a cabin, 20 minutes from here. Small place, but warm and safe. You and Barnaby could stay there while you figure out next steps, as long as you need." Lydia turned her head toward his voice. She couldn't see his face clearly, just a blur of features, the shape of him, but she didn't need clear vision to understand the offer. "That's very kind, but—" "It's not kindness," Elias interrupted. "It's selfishness. I want more time with you. I want to hear more of your stories. I want to show you the photographs I took. I want to know you." The honesty in his voice was stunning. Lydia had spent 3 years with Sharon, who'd never once said anything so direct, so vulnerable. "Why?" Lydia asked. "I'm 52. I'm nearly blind. I have a dog and a basket of candy and nothing else. Why would you want to know me?" "Because in 5 days of hell you created beauty," Elias said. "Because you forgave someone who didn't deserve forgiveness. Because you're strong in ways I'm not. Because when I look at you, I don't see limitations. I see possibility." Lydia felt tears on her cheeks, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd almost forgotten the sensation. Being seen, not as a burden, not as a problem to be managed, but as a whole person worth knowing. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay with you for a while." Elias's cabin was exactly what he'd described: small, warm, safe. A single-story log structure with a stone fireplace, large windows overlooking pine forest, a kitchen that smelled of coffee and wood smoke. It was a photographer's retreat, filled with equipment and prints, but also surprisingly comfortable. "Guest room is here," Elias said, showing her a small bedroom with a double bed, clean linens, and a window seat. "Bathroom's next door. Kitchen's always open. Barnaby can sleep wherever he wants. I'm not picky." That first night, Lydia slept for 14 hours straight, her body finally allowing itself to rest now that she was truly safe. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could smell bacon cooking. She found Elias in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. Barnaby was sprawled on a rug by the fireplace, looking content. "Morning," Elias said. "How are you feeling?" "Rested." Lydia accepted the plate he handed her. Bacon, eggs, toast. Real food, warm and plentiful. "Thank you. For all of this, I have something to show you," Elias said after they'd eaten. "If you're up for it." He led her to his studio, a converted sunroom with his computer and printing equipment. He'd been up since dawn, working on the photographs from the bus. "I can't see them clearly," Lydia said, gesturing at the large monitor displaying his work. "I know, but I can describe them." Elias pulled up the first image. "This is you, sitting in your sanctuary. The candlelight is catching the silk curtains behind you, turning them amber and rose. Your hands are holding one of your honey jars, and the light is coming through the honey, making it glow gold. Your face is peaceful. You look like a queen in her palace." He clicked to the next image. "This is the bundles of lavender hanging from the ceiling. They look like organic chandeliers. The light and shadow create patterns that look almost like lace." He went through dozens of photographs, describing each one in detail, the honey jars arranged like art, the silk curtains glowing, Barnaby curled protectively at Lydia's feet, the overall transformation of decay into beauty. "These are extraordinary," Lydia said, hearing in his voice the passion of someone who'd captured something special. "What are you going to do with them?" "With your permission, I'd like to publish them," Elias said. "Not as a human interest piece about survival, though that's part of it, but as an art series about transformation, about finding beauty in impossible places, about resilience made visible." "And me?" Lydia asked. "What happens to me in these photos? Do I become a curiosity? The poor blind woman who survived?" "You become an artist," Elias said firmly, "because that's what you are, someone who creates beauty. The story isn't about what was done to you, it's about what you created in response." Over the next 2 weeks, as Lydia recovered and Elias worked on the photo series, something unexpected happened. They fell in love. Not the dramatic, passionate love of youth, but the quiet, deep love of two people who'd lived enough life to recognize something rare when they found it. They talked for hours, about Daniel and Elias's ex-wife, about photography and candy making, about vision and blindness, both literal and metaphorical. They cooked together, walked in the snowy forest together, sat by the fire together. Elias described the world to her in ways she'd never experienced. Not just what things looked like, but how light worked, how shadows created dimension, how color told stories. He helped her see through his eyes. Lydia taught him about texture and scent and taste, how to experience the world through senses he'd overlooked. She showed him how to navigate by touch, how to trust intuition, how to find beauty in darkness. "I've been alone for 15 years, Elias said one night as they sat by the fire. "I thought I preferred it that way, but I was wrong. I was just waiting. For you." "I loved Daniel for 31 years, Lydia said. "I thought that was my one chance at love, that I'd used up my quota. But maybe love doesn't work that way. Maybe we get as many chances as we're brave enough to take." "Are you brave enough?" Elias asked. "Yes," Lydia said. "I survived 5 days in a frozen bus. I'm brave enough for anything." He kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of promise. And Lydia, who'd been told she was too old, too blind, too much of a burden, felt young and seen and absolutely necessary. Elias published the photo series 3 weeks later in National Geographic's online edition. The article was titled, "The Sanctuary: How One Woman Transformed Abandonment into Art." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The photographs went viral, shared millions of times across social media. News outlets picked up the story. Morning shows called for interviews. The images of Lydia's sanctuary, the amber-lit silk, the golden honey jars, the lavender chandeliers, became symbols of resilience and creativity. But more than the images, it was Lydia's story that resonated. A 52-year-old woman with failing eyesight, abandoned by her sister, surviving through ingenuity and determination, creating beauty in the face of death. People saw themselves in her, saw their own abandonments, their own limitations, their own capacity to transform suffering into something meaningful. Offers poured in. A book deal, a documentary proposal, partnerships with craft companies wanting to sell Lydia's Lavender Sanctuary home goods. But the offer that mattered most came from a small town in Montana, 40 minutes from Elias's cabin. The town council wanted to give Lydia the old community center building, a beautiful 1920s structure that had been sitting vacant for 5 years, free of charge, to use however she wanted. "We've been looking for someone to bring life back to this space," the mayor said when she and Elias visited. "Your story inspired us. We want to help you build something permanent." Lydia stood in the empty building, her hands tracing the old wooden walls, and felt possibility unfold. "I want to call it the Sanctuary," she said. "Not a store, not really. A place where people can come to learn and create and heal. I'll sell my candies and other goods, but I'll also teach workshops, candy making, natural crafts, how to create beauty with simple materials. A place for people who feel forgotten, who feel like they have nothing to offer, a place to prove they're wrong." Within 3 months, the sanctuary opened. The old community center had been transformed, not with expensive renovations, but with the same aesthetic Lydia had created in the bus. Silk curtains caught natural light. Honey jars lined the windows. Lavender hung from exposed beams. Long wooden tables filled the center space, ready for workshops and classes. The opening day was packed. People drove from across Montana and from neighboring states. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to meet the woman from the viral photos, but many came because they saw something of themselves in Lydia's story. A 60-year-old man whose family had stopped inviting him to holidays, a 45-year-old woman going through divorce, a 70-year-old widow who'd lost her husband and her purpose, a 30-year-old with a disability who'd been told she'd never be independent. They came to the sanctuary and found what Lydia had found in that frozen bus, proof that they could create something beautiful, that they mattered, that abandonment wasn't the end, but sometimes the beginning. Lydia taught her workshops with patient hands and a warm voice, guiding people through the process of making lavender honey candy, of creating silk sachets, of building miniature sanctuaries from simple materials. You don't need sight to create beauty, she told her students. You need imagination and determination and the willingness to try. That's all, those things you already have. Elias photographed everything, creating a visual record of the sanctuary's first year. But he also did something else. He moved in with Lydia. They'd bought a small house together halfway between the sanctuary and his cabin. It had a workshop for Lydia, a studio for Elias, a garden where they planned to plant lavender in the spring, and a big yard for Barnaby. "This is what I needed," Lydia said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Not to be rescued, not to be taken care of, but to be seen, to be believed in, to be given space to create. You gave that to yourself," Elias said. "I just had the privilege of witnessing it." 6 months after the sanctuary opened, Sharon appeared. Lydia was in the workshop, teaching a class on natural perfumes, when her sister walked through the door. She looked older, tired, uncertain in a way Lydia had never seen her. "Can we talk?" Sharon asked. "Please?" Lydia excused herself from the class, had one of her assistants take over, and led Sharon to a small office in the back. "I saw the articles," Sharon said. "The photographs. I saw what you built. What I almost—" Her voice broke. "What I almost killed." "You didn't kill anything," Lydia said calmly. "You tried to discard me, but I wouldn't be discarded. I'm sorry." Sharon was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Lydia. I was exhausted and angry, and I told myself you'd be fine, that someone would find you, that I was just giving you a push to accept help. But I knew, God help me, I knew how cold it was. I knew that road was empty. I knew I might be killing you, and I did it anyway." Lydia listened, feeling the weight of her sister's guilt, her late-arriving remorse. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sharon continued. "I know what I did is unforgivable, but I needed to tell you I'm sorry, that I see now what I couldn't see then, that you were never the burden. I was. I was the one who couldn't handle life, who couldn't see past my own fear and resentment. You were always stronger than me, always braver, and I hated you for it. I forgave you," Lydia said quietly. "Months ago, in that bus on the worst night, I forgave you, not because you earned it, because I refused to carry the weight of your cruelty anymore." Sharon looked up, hope and confusion on her face. "You forgave me?" "I did. But forgiveness doesn't mean restoration, Sharon. It doesn't mean we go back to how things were. It means I've let go of the anger, but I haven't forgotten the lesson. You showed me who you are. I believe you. So we can't—" Sharon's voice trailed off. "Be sisters. We are sisters. We'll always be sisters. But we can't be what we were. I can't depend on you. I can't trust you. I can send you Christmas cards and ask about your life and wish you well. But I can't let you close enough to hurt me again." It was the kindest, firmest boundary Lydia had ever set. And watching Sharon's face, she saw acceptance. Not happiness, but acceptance. "I understand," Sharon said. "Thank you for not hating me." "I don't hate you," Lydia said honestly. "I pity you, because you missed the chance to know me, the real me, and that's a loss you'll carry forever." After Sharon left, Lydia returned to her workshop. Her students were working quietly, their hands creating small sanctuaries of their own. The air smelled of lavender and honey, Sunlight streamed through the silk curtains, turning everything amber and gold. Elias appeared in the doorway, camera in hand but not raised, just checking on her. "You okay?" he mouthed. Lydia smiled and nodded. More than okay. She was exactly where she needed to be. 1 year after her abandonment, the sanctuary hosted an anniversary celebration. Hundreds of people came, students, supporters, curious visitors. Local news covered it. Lydia gave a speech, standing in the center of her beautiful space, Barnaby at her feet, Elias at her side. "A year ago I was left to die on a frozen road," she said. "I had no home, no resources, very little hope. But I had my hands. I had my creativity. I had a dog who refused to give up on me. And I had the memory of someone who'd always believed I was capable of extraordinary things." She thought of Daniel, of his lavender garden, of the way he'd always encouraged her to create. "I don't tell this story to inspire pity. I tell it to inspire possibility. Because if I could create beauty in an abandoned bus in -35-degree weather with failing eyesight and almost no resources, then you can create beauty wherever you are, whatever your limitations, whatever your circumstances." She gestured around the sanctuary. "This isn't just a business, it's proof that we are not the sum of what's been done to us. We're the sum of what we choose to create in response. And we can always, always choose to create beauty." The applause was thunderous. That night, Lydia and Elias drove home to their small house. Barnaby slept in the back seat, tired and happy. The sky was clear, stars visible in the Montana darkness. "Happy?" Elias asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Lydia said. "A year ago I thought my life was over, that I was used up, worthless, done. But I was wrong. I was just beginning, the real me, the me I'd been hiding under everyone else's expectations." "The you I fell in love with," Elias said. "The me I fell in love with," Lydia corrected. Finally. Inside their house, Lydia went to the small room she used as a private studio. On the wall hung one of Elias's photographs from the bus, her sitting in the amber light, surrounded by her handmade sanctuary, her face peaceful and strong. Below the photograph, on a small shelf, sat the brass key Sharon had given her that day, the key to the old gas station's locked door, the key that had been useless, that had opened nothing. Lydia kept it not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of truth, that some doors are meant to stay locked, that some keys don't fit, that sometimes the real key to survival is refusing to accept someone else's lock. She'd learned to build her own doors, to create her own keys, to construct sanctuaries that no one could take away, because they existed not in buildings, but in her capable hands, her creative spirit, her unbreakable will to transform suffering into light. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, not the killing storm of a year ago, but the peaceful snow of winter settling in. Lydia opened the window slightly, breathing in the cold air, no longer afraid of it. She'd survived the worst winter could offer. She'd transformed frost into beauty, darkness into light, abandonment into art. And she was just getting started. The sanctuary of glass and honey wasn't just a place. It was a promise that no winter lasts forever, that beauty can bloom in frozen ground, that love arrives when you least expect it and most need it, and that sometimes being left behind is the greatest gift you'll ever receive, because it forces you to discover who you are when no one's watching. And who Lydia was, it turned out, was extraordinary. If Lydia's story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share powerful stories every week about people who transformed their darkest moments into their greatest triumphs. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been abandoned or underestimated? Have you ever created beauty from suffering? Share your story. Someone reading might need to hear it today. Lydia teaches us profound truths about resilience, creativity, and self-worth. She teaches us that the worst betrayals sometimes lead to the greatest discoveries. Sharon's abandonment was cruel and unforgivable, but it forced Lydia to discover her own strength, her own capacity to survive and create and thrive without anyone's permission or support. She teaches us that limitations are often lies we've been told about ourselves, Lydia was told she was helpless because of her vision, but in 5 days of brutal survival, she proved that creativity, determination, and resourcefulness matter more than perfect eyesight. She saw clearly what mattered most. Most importantly, she teaches us that it's never too late to bloom. At 52, abandoned and nearly blind, Lydia could have given up. Instead, she built a sanctuary, found love, created a thriving business, and became an inspiration to thousands. Age is just a number. Limitation is just a challenge waiting to be transformed into possibility. For anyone who's been abandoned, underestimated, or told they're past their prime, remember Lydia. Remember that you have everything you need already inside you. Your hands can create, your spirit can endure, your heart can heal and love again. And sometimes, the people who abandon you are doing you the greatest favor, removing themselves from your life so you can finally discover who you truly are. Thank you for joining us for Lydia's incredible journey from abandonment to artistry. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that beauty can bloom even in the coldest winter. We'll see you in the next story.